Thanks for tuning in to the Channel Final Bell. I'm Steve White on the Rural Radio Network. When I was looking at the numbers, corn mixed, maybe a little weaker, soybean futures up, and some interesting things maybe happening in the cattle markets. Joining us to talk about all of that, Austin Schroeder's joining us. Austin, when we're looking at, what did we see today? What numbers, what direction were things trending generally today?
Yeah, well, you look at the markets here, the corn leaked a little bit lower here, just kind of kept on grinding lower, approached some of those old lows, at least on the December contract specifically. You look over on the bean side, we did see a little bit of positive action here. You saw some strength over on the soybean meal side. It kind of helped the soybean complex to be a little bit stronger there. And over on the wheat, kind of closed a little bit mixed, maybe just slightly mixed over there, maybe a little bit weaker. Cattle market kind of climbed back out of the early weakness. I guess it is kind of back and forth throughout the day, but did end on a higher note.
You know, when we're looking at things on the grain side, gosh, we just continue to see good weather across the Corn Belt. Not hearing about any major issues. This is just a case where crop size is just limiting any chance of some upside movement.
Yeah, for the most part, I think the market definitely has a pretty big yield kind of penciled in their minds in terms of what we're looking at for that national average yield. That is a national average. I know there's some spots, specifically we have clients up in north central Iowa that are a little too wet. They've kind of been, just been a little too wet for their liking. It's kind of been seeing some nutrient leaching and just some low spots and getting some, I guess, just generally too wet areas that's kind of maybe hindering some of the yields. There's been a few pollination issues if you kind of, are keeping an eye on Twitter, but I think you have some of that every year. So, for the most part, the market has a pretty big yield, especially over on the corn side. Now the bean side, it's a little bit more iffy. We kind of look more towards August weather and see where we're at in terms of making any more rock hard conclusions in terms of what that bean yield looks like. But for the most part, it's just looks like a pretty big crop, and that's kind of the market's main focus right now. And I think it's probably one of those cases that until you kind of see where the USDA is penciled in mind, at least that we'll get their numbers here on August 12th. Until you get their numbers in hand, you're probably just going to kind of continue to leak lower here, and unless you get something thrown out there that changes the picture.
I was just going to ask you about that. We're about a week away from getting some USDA numbers. We've also got the Pro Farmer Tour coming up. How important will it be to get some numbers from a couple of different sources here on just what we're looking at in terms of this year's crop?
Yeah, well, I think it'll solve a couple issues, right? Because you have the USDA crop condition ratings, which overall shows some of the best crop we've seen here since those ratings have gone on. It's not necessarily record in terms of those ratings, but it's pretty good overall. The NDVI ratings, which basically are the satellite imagery, that shows the best we've seen here, at least since 2000. Some of that doesn't necessarily pick up those pollination issues, so that's definitely going to be something to keep an eye on here, and you're going to get those. The USDA report is partially based off that NDVI data, but it's also based off of some more farmer surveys. So you're going to get a little bit more boots on the ground. So I think the market's definitely waiting to get some hands on some more boots on the ground type of data to kind of confirm or change their minds in terms of what the overall yield looks like. And then obviously you have that crop tour there from Pro Farmer later in the month here, I believe the week after the USDA crop report.
Right.
And we're also having our virtual corn tour that we're trying to get some samples for as well. So,
cool.
I think once you get some more data points in terms of that, guys walking through the fields, it's definitely going to give a better picture in terms of the overall crop.
And then specifically on soybeans, we're looking at any weather issues there. I mean, we're into August now. Anything jump out at you in terms of what weather could impact that soybean crop?
Yeah, and our research has kind of suggested that August weather plays a lot larger role in terms of what happens with the bean yield. So we're kind of right into the thick of it in terms of beans right now. You look at the forecast, some of the moisture is limited in parts of the eastern Corn Belt. For the next week, the western Corn Belt looks to be a little bit wetter with some maybe spottier showers, but it does look like you're going to get some precip. But again, the east which kind of missed some rains last year and caused some yield issues on the beans. Looks like it may be missing some at least through the first week of August. Again, I think there's a little bit of a difference there in the soil moisture profiles. I think you're looking at maybe some wetter soil so far this year, so that may limit some of any potential for yield loss. But it does look like it's a little bit drier. The 8 to 14 day maybe looks a little bit wetter, or some better odds for precip. So kind of mixed, I guess, if you're looking at a forecast. The temperatures do look a little bit warmer as well if you look at some more extended forecasts. So the market's definitely going to be looking at that, I think with maybe a little bit drier and possibly warmer forecast. Maybe they add a little bit of premium back in the bean market here today. But I think there's some other factors going on too with some export inspections report that was relatively good on the bean side. You saw the fourth largest export inspections number for this week, going all the way back to 2002. That's kind of amidst I guess a trade war with China going on. One of our themes has kind of been that at the moment anyway, when China's more focused on the Brazilian supplies, you've been getting a little bit more business from the U.S., mainly due to the fact that Brazil's kind of marking up their prices a little bit higher due to those tariffs that China does have on the U.S. And so it is making U.S. beans a little bit cheaper to other destinations that don't have the tariffs on. And you saw some business to Indonesia and Germany, I believe, some EU countries here pop up today. So that's, I think, one other thing that kind of gave the bean market a little bit of support here today as well.
Well, very good. That is a good breakdown today of where things are looking on the grain complex. Some interesting things happening in the cattle side of things. We will take a look at that and you are listening to the Channel Final Bell on the Rural Radio Network.
KRVN.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Channel Final Bell. I'm Steve White on the Rural Radio Network. Austin Schroeder, our guest today. And Austin, you were mentioning some kind of dynamics happening in the cattle side of things today. What exactly were we watching play out today?
Yeah, we had kind of some back and forth trade. You saw some pretty strong gains early on, and then you kind of backed off into the midday, and then you ended up closing higher. So there's definitely been a lot of price movement intraday, but again, overall we did close with some gains. I think part of that was if you look specifically on the feeder cattle side of things, I believe we did gap higher at that 8:30 open, and so I think some of that was just going back and filling the gaps, and then again kind of resuming the overall positive trade here. But I think when you look back at last week, you saw that big sell off on Thursday. Again, I think a lot of that was attributed just to some month-end selling.
Sure.
You got a lot of guys who've made a lot of money in the cattle market here, so they kind of squared up at the month end, made their balance sheets look a little bit better here, and kind of resumed the money flow into the feeder and the live cattle here over the last couple of days. I think the fundamental picture hasn't really shifted from a supply side standpoint, right? We still have tight numbers. I think looking a little further out, I think the market's definitely going to be focused on what the feeder supplies are looking like here this fall, especially when you got guys thinking about maybe retaining more heifers. I think there's going to be some limited action in terms of going out and buying a lot of replacement heifers. There may be some locally, but I think that's going to be somewhat limited here with these high interest rates and the cost of these things at this point. But you're likely going to see some retention here. And so I think when you look at the fact that we don't have any imports coming in from Mexico,
right,
it's likely going to continue to tighten those feeder cow supplies moving forward.
And Austin, we're also kind of on the demand side. We're ending kind of nearing the end of that summer grilling season. That is such a strength. What impact could that have on livestock prices as we're kind of start to reach that transition point?
Yeah, you've seen a pretty good pullback in that box beef cutout here over the last month or so. You kind of posted some highs around that 4th of July holiday, and then we backed off anywhere from $30 to $40, depending on if you're looking at choice or select. So you've definitely seen some pressure come in after you got past that 4th of July holiday. From a seasonal standpoint, you typically will get some sort of strength over the next couple weeks, as we head into that Labor Day holiday, kind of restocking some shelves ahead of that Labor Day demand. And then, kind of moving forward, it does get a little bit weaker just from a pure seasonal standpoint. I guess looking at those beef prices or the drop in the overall cutout, it really hasn't impacted things much from a cash perspective. You got a little bit of a pullback there from the 240 down to the 235 range or so, and then you immediately shot back up to the 245, 247 range up in the north at least. And so I think the market's definitely keeping an eye on that consumer demand moving forward, but this far. It hasn't necessarily put much in overall pressure on the cash movement.
Yeah, it's interesting as you point out that certainly there's some seasonal things happening there, but in general, though, I mean the consumer demand still seems pretty strong. People still want that beef product, and it's been fascinating to kind of watch. I mean, we've always kind of wondered if we got to this territory, how would the consumer approach things at the supermarket, and they're still buying beef. So it has been fascinating to watch that, hasn't it?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, you have seen a little bit of a pullback. I think there's been some hesitancy, but there's still guys buying beef. We're still getting rid of it. Your beef stocks are still tight. Tightest at least since 2014 here from that latest cold storage report anyway. So we're still getting rid of it. So beef is still king here to this point, and you haven't seen. You've seen a little bit of a demand shift, but for the most part, what's been out there has kind of been sold. So.
And yeah, you mentioned it a moment ago too, but we talked about this a little bit last week. We did see some movement last Thursday, but now as you kind of reflect back on that, are you pretty confident that was just a matter of the calendar changing pages, and you haven't really seen anything that kind of change your mind on that, have you?
Futures movement there on Thursday, yeah, I think a lot of it was just month end. I guess it did cause a little bit of, if you look at the feeder cattle charts, maybe a little technical damage, but we're kind of bouncing back out.
So just kind of wrapping things up, but I mean, you continue to see continued strength in those cattle markets.
Yep, yeah, I think you moving forward, you're obviously susceptible to some corrections, and again, looking back to Thursday, you saw that selling, the market is very susceptible to large sell-offs or large moves in 1, 2, 3 day moves. Given the length of the spec funds in those markets, it's definitely a risk out there. But for the most part, again, the fundamentals are still relatively strong. I think we can continue to trudge on higher. You may be seeing some limited cash movement in terms of some strength here over the next few weeks. Just given where the box beef's kind of been hovering here over the last few weeks, there may be some pressure from the Packers side, but for the most part, I think you're going to continue to trudge on.
Well, Austin, appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, that is the Channel Final Bell, brought to you by Channel Seed and your local Channel Seed dealer. Do remember, trading of futures and options involve risk of loss and may not be suitable for all investors. That's today's Channel Final Bell on the Rural Radio Network. I'm Steve White.